Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better Futures Community webinar with Wakanyi Hoffman. My name is Jorge Barrios, and I'm a Senior Program Coordinator in the Impact Team here at Steelcase. I have the pleasure of hosting our session today on traditional wisdom and emerging futures. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to share a little about what brings us all together today. At Steelcase, we focus on helping the world work better, and we believe that doing our best work for the places we all share starts with designing better futures for the well-being of people and the planet. We believe that designing these better futures require collective imagination and collaboration. Through the Better Futures community, we bring together a global network of employees, community partners, dealers, and clients to explore bold ideas around our people and planet commitments. This year, many of our conversations have centered on technological development and the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, how it is transforming workplaces, reshaping relationships, and accelerating decision-making. As AI become increasingly present in the tools we use, we're asking some big questions, like what values guide the systems we're building, and how do we make sure that technology strengthens rather than replaces our sense of shared humanity? And this brings us to our guest today, Wakanyi Hoffman. Wakanyi Hoffman is an author, public speaker, scholar, and folklorist whose work bridges African indigenous wisdom and emerging technologies. She is a researcher at the Inclusive AI Lab at Utrecht University, where she explores how Ubuntu, the African philosophy rooted in interconnectedness, compassion, and shared humanity, can serve as an ethical framework for responsible AI development. Wakanyi is also the founder of the Humanity Link Foundation and the curator of the African Folktales Project, a groundbreaking effort to preserve and elevate indigenous knowledge systems. Through her writing, speaking, and storytelling, she invites us to imagine new futures shaped not only by data and algorithms, but by ancestral wisdom, moral imagination, and our deep responsibility to one another and to the planet. Today, Wakanyi will guide us through a thought-provoking reflection on how traditional philosophies like Ubuntu can help us build systems and workplaces that foster belonging, nurture soul, and ensure that innovation remains in service of our shared humanity. As always, we invite you to participate throughout the session. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom and not the chat to submit your questions. We'll have the time for a live discussion with Wakanyi towards the end of the hour. With that, I'd like to warmly welcome Wakanyi Hoffman to the Better Futures community. Wakanyi, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and welcome to everyone that's on the call. Thank you. To begin with, I want to apologize. My computer has a little technical issue, so I've got Ashley working behind the scenes as my assistant, who will then be able to share my slides. And if so, Ashley, you can pull out the slides, that would be great. Thank you so much. So as Jorge, I don't need to go through what he introduced here about my work. I am an Ubuntu practitioner, and what that means is not like a doctor of Ubuntu or something like that. But what it really means is that I embed and I embody this principle of Ubuntu, which I will explain exactly what that means, having lived in that experience. And now I take that with me, and what I'm trying to do is to work out how can this Ubuntu philosophy that is really about interconnectedness, how can we then operationalize it, and what can we learn from that in order to look at what the future looks like from an Ubuntu perspective. And so Ubuntu really, I say, is a willingness to see the whole reality together as it is, right? And across cultures, the way we see shapes the way we live, design, and relate. So I really want to bring Ubuntu away from just an African concept into something that we can use to see the world together as we are. And today, many of us look through what I call a kaleidoscopic perspective, which is really a curated sense of reality, where there are fragments of life that we have curated or have been curated for us that we experience on social media and TV. And all these images are really dazzling, but they're also quite disorienting and disconnected. And they're based on something that is predetermined. It's not really your own actual reality, which is what I'm going to get into when I'm talking about Ubuntu. So in this session, I will ask us to turn instead to a different way of looking at life, which is through what I discovered, this instrument called the kaleidoscope, a lens that refracts reality as it is, and then invite us to perceive diversity as truth rather than the illusion of truth that each of us creates, because we all can create our own versions of reality, which is that kaleidoscopic reality, which we then share with each other as if that is the only reality. But the kaleidoscopic reality is looking at what is actually in the field of vision without any sort of manipulation, right? And from this starting point, then we can begin to explore Ubuntu, this African philosophy of relational humanity, which is usually captured in this phrase, I am because of who we are. And it's a way of honoring not just our interconnectedness with people and communities, but also with the more than human world, meaning that the environment that we all live in. And building from this sort of ancestral African wisdom, we can then consider how Ubuntu can give us what I'm calling this clariscopic vision, a clarity of seeing the whole together through this Ubuntu eye, and move from these fragments to creating a shared clarity together. And I'm going to use proverbs and stories and indigenous metaphors. And I'm going to also invite you all as participants to imagine how then we can use Ubuntu as a guide in designing in our workplaces with AI, designing for trust, dialogue, and flourishing futures, as is a theme of this webinar. And including how these emerging tools, such as artificial intelligence, might serve not as an ends in themselves, but as part of our collective toolkit for how we sustain life and how we grow as communities that are always evolving and emerging with different cultures included, right? So I'm going to go to the second slide here and ask you to imagine looking through a kaleidoscope, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced a kaleidoscope. But a kaleidoscope is a different instrument, which I just discovered very recently. And so that's my inspiration to have this perspective as a metaphor, this kaleidoscopic perspective. So you've probably looked through a kaleidoscope. It's really interesting to change the lens and see different colors. And it dazzles with shapes and colors, but it is also an image of a closed world, right? So that image, whatever the image you see, is always going to be it's designed to give you a particular illusion, right? So you're trapped inside the creator's design or the creator's mind. So this illusion is not really the reality, but in that moment, it looks like it is your reality that you're experiencing. Now, the kaleidoscope, on the other hand, is imagine a tube of mirrors. So instead of all these fragments inside the kaleidoscope that are designed by someone else, you see the real world refracted in patterns. That's what the kaleidoscope really is. And what you see depends obviously on where you are and what you're looking at, what you're pointing at. But the vision is yours to interpret at the very end. And so this is how I want us to begin to see differently and to get into that space of what it means to see with Ubuntu eyes, to see the whole together. Not by being trapped in curated illusions, which is what the kaleidoscope does, but by learning to see reality refracted, changing from many angles, and then together, after that, we can then start to make sense of what exactly we're seeing. So I want you to really reflect on how do you see the world that you share with your community, whether it's at Steelcase or anywhere else where you're part of any kind of community. How do you really see the world that we are all sharing, right? Because like I said, we all look at the world through our own kaleidoscopic, biased perspective. But what if we shifted that into that sort of kaleidoscope where we are not, there's no illusion. We then can see the whole, but obviously we're all looking at different parts of the whole. And there's a proverb that goes like this, that the one who looks with only one eye cannot see the whole elephant, right? And this is a story of, if you had a group of people that were visually impaired, so can't see, right? Physically, visually impaired, and ask them to touch an elephant and ask them what they're touching, what are they feeling, they would all describe a different part of that animal. But if they could see, they would see the whole. And so that's what I hope to get to the end, is where we can get a new vision and start to see with these Ubuntu eyes. So let's move on to this slide, where I want you to look at this image and really kind of analyze what's going on here. So on the left-hand side, you have people standing under a baobab tree. right? And this is one of those enormous trees that are mostly found in Africa, very old. They can be about 3,000 years old. And then on the other hand, you have people inside individual boats in the open sea. So we're all in the sea together, but we're all in individual boats. That's the complete opposite of Ubuntu, which is we're all under the umbrella. We're all under the baobab tree together. But both images, there's not one that's better than the other. They both capture the essence of being human together, right? We're all either in the same sea, but we're all individualized in our own little boats, or we're all standing, sheltering under the same tree together, right? So Ubuntu denotes this closeness, being inside the same boat, being inside the same environment, right? And it comes, the word Ubuntu comes from Southern African languages. And the root Ntu means being human or being, and Ubu means beingness, right? So together, Ubuntu is a compound word that means being human, the art of becoming human together. And hence the saying, a person is a person through other persons, or Umuntu, Gubuntu, Gabantu. It really captures that essence of being human together under the same tree versus individualized thinking or separation, right? As the both show us. Now, and this is true all across Africa. For example, if a child is born, the community will gather. For me, for example, when I was born, the community would gathered around my grandmother's house, and all the different relatives came to hold the baby. And this is a way of saying, look, we're all in this together. I am because of who we are. And so this is welcoming the child in that web of relations, right? So when we gather around that baobab tree, we're all acknowledging that we're all in this together versus scrambling to tiny boats, designing for that kind of experience where you always feel this sense of separation. Ubuntu is literally the opposite of separation. And so here we'll move to the fourth slide, and I can get into the ancestral knowledge of what it means to see together. So like I said, Ubuntu is captured in this saying, I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. So meaning it is a relational intelligence. It is a relational philosophy, and it insists that we are co-constituted, not just by other humans, but actually by also land, ancestors, rivers, trees, and all of what we are in the web of life, which is everything. And so going back to that metaphor of the kaleidoscope, Ubuntu is like that kaleidoscope, where each person's perspective refracts a piece of reality. And then together, it forms a fuller picture that reveals the whole, right? So relational wholeness that everyone can contribute to, that everyone can see. And therefore, it's a shared evolution, this being together on this planet together. And let's move on to the fifth slide, please. Can I have yeah, thank you so much. So what is this kaleidoscopic Ubuntu vision? This seeing emerging futures together look like? We say in Africa that wisdom is like a baobab tree. No one person can hold it all, right? So when we're talking systems, a kaleidoscope refracts diverse images, right? Such as forests, cities, faces, and it depends on where it's being turned or tuned. So with that Ubuntu vision, we're talking about being able to see all those images all at once and then create a bigger picture. And from there, then coherence comes on. So how do we design for that? And I'll go into the design principles of that. But just quickly, I want to talk about what that kaleidoscopic vision allows us to see. It allows us to see reality emerging, not as it is curated for us. So when you think about being a designer, and I know that Steelcase designs office furniture and ways of being together at a workplace, how do you design for that? Think about that. How do you design for spaces that allow us to see who we are together, how we sit together so that we're not excluding a particular person, how we think about a particular problem that we're dealing with maybe in our community, and so on and so forth. So it invites us to attend to those fragments of real life, and real life can be really messy, where voices, cultures, needs, and perspectives are treated as meaningful parts of the whole. So that's what I really mean when I talk about a kaleidoscopic Ubuntu vision. For example, what do different communities need to flourish? When you're talking about, designing for different needs for different communities, you might say that some communities need more technology, others need less technology. You might say that some need to give up to have less consumption, and others might need more consumption. I work a lot with humanitarian organizations, and this is a constant discussion as to how do you enable for communities that to develop their own flourishing mechanism, rather than come and impose on them and say, this is what you need, rather than understanding exactly what they need on the ground, because they're the ones who have to live with the problem and the solutions and the maintenance of the solutions. So the kaleidoscopic perspective helps us perceive those differences when we look at the whole through the same lens, not as competition, but as the diversity of our reality as it is. So let's move on to slide 6. So how do we do this? From seeing multiplicity to shared clarity. And this is really the heart of my presentation today, is that I want us to get to that, even move beyond the kaleidoscope and get to that claroscopic vision that I'm talking about. So if kaleidoscopic vision means we respect multiplicity, that there are different ways of seeing, right? It's not kaleidoscopic. It's not designed to give you an illusion, but actually what you're seeing is what it is. Then the pattern of flourishing can only emerge when we honor each shared reality, that each perspective is actually creating a bigger picture. So, and hence the saying that wisdom is like a baobab tree. No one person can hold it together. So think about it really. What patterns of reality become visible in your work or in your community when you allow multiple perspectives to be seen and not just your own? And then what might it take in your organization to move from all those many voices? Because again, we don't want to be stuck in only listening and collecting the collective intelligence. We also want to come into a clarified vision where we can then move together. So what does that look like to get to that clarified shared vision about what matters most? And there's another proverb there that's really interesting that says, when spiders unite, they can tie down a lion. So if there's a problem, how do we come together? What is that self-organizing principle? And how do you organize for self-organizing to be the principle of operation? So let's move on to the 7th slide on Ubuntu and technology, which is a big part of my work. So I've been developing a framework of Ubuntu principles that can be used to inform designers of AI, and also as a framework that is embedded in AI tools to ensure that the AI is actually helping us, is a tool that we can use alongside other tools, and not just the only tool that can be quite extractive. And there's a tool for everything, right? Whether you like constructing or gardening, there's a tool for all of that. You will always find your tool, but you can also work without the tool. And so this is one of the main things that I'm looking at. What does it mean to understand fully how to use AI to work with you, and how to use AI to not work with you, right? So this is a very, very interesting distinction, and it takes these Ubuntu principles to get to that point. So let's move on to slide number 8. Or actually, just get back to that slide, and I'll finish up what I wanted to say. One of the things that's been overtold, it's an overtold story, and it is really true, and it bears repeating, is that human beings cannot live without technology. We had the fire. Some people are saying the AI is a latest fire that we are discovering. We had the plow, we had the printing press, and each one of those technologies shaped our future. And now, of course, AI is only the latest thing in this long lineage of technologies, certainly not the last. So there's an inherent danger here in how we handle AI tools in our workplace, in our communities, in our homes even. If we see AI as the tool, then we risk that kaleidoscopic perspective that I was talking about. Then it becomes a tool for curating a particular reality, an illusion, and further alienating, right? But if we go with the Ubuntu kaleidoscopic perspective, Then we can look at how might these AI tools actually help us restore relationships, because Ubuntu is all about relationships, and therefore to prevent further fragmentation. There are many ways that AI is being used all over the place, but for me personally, I find it interesting to discover how AI is helping us solve certain problems. For example, preserving language, preserving certain cultural ways of understanding each other, helping us visualize what's going on in our ecosystems, and supporting such methods such as indigenous land management, climate technology, and all of that. This is really interesting. But then, of course, we also know that we're also using AI to develop other tools that might not be necessary for everyone. So this is a question this is a tension that I want us to hold. How are we actually using artificial intelligence? It can also be used to surveil, exploit, divide. We know that. So really, it is the onus is on the user, right? You as a person who has artificial intelligence in your hands, how do you understand the power of what you're using? Is that tool necessary in that particular task that you're performing? Not to forget that, AI is also really tied to a lot of environmental degradation. And this bears repeating all the time. So we need to use AI like a kaleidoscope to expand these perspectives, not to reduce them. And then we also need this clarity, this clariscopic Ubuntu, so that we're able to weave our different perspectives into clarity before we can design something new that can be used by all, right? We need to collect those different perspectives. So how do you use AI today? That's one thing I want you to sit with. Does it embrace your community or does it risk fragmenting it? Let's slide 8, please. And these are the 5 principles of Ubuntu that I have been developing in our AI lab that I work at. I look at artificial intelligence and how it is being innovated in Africa. And therefore, the Ubuntu design principles are really important to look into when I'm talking to designers on the ground. But certainly not just for Africa. This is necessary for, I think, for the entire world, to really think when we're thinking about what does it mean to design with the human in the loop. And these principles of Ubuntu, a word that literally means being human, come in handy when we're talking about that. So how do we move from that theory, that idea of Ubuntu is nice to have, but what does it actually look like in action? And so when we're talking about AI, what I'm really looking at is the relationality. How well is your AI relating to these ideas of interconnectedness? And of course, I use a lot of indigenous language because that's my background. But at the same time, this is the way in which we're looking also at the future. We understand now that the myth of separation has led us to where we're at. So how do we get to interconnectedness, and how do we design for interconnectedness? And is your AI designed for purposeful interaction, in the sense that are we able to then honor the different multiple perspectives of that kaleidoscopic vision? And from there, does everyone have access to this shared wisdom, whatever is a collective wisdom that comes out? And are we able to dignify, to preserve dignity, the dignity of all the people that are involved in whatever design of anything that we're designing? And then at the same time, does your AI allow for dialogical design? Because that's one thing that, I'm sure we've all been using ChatGPT and the rest. It is designed to give you a sense of having a particular conversation you're having. But at the end of the day, as one of my colleagues said, it is designed to mimic a dialogue within a monologue. So think about what an AI would look like if it was actually designed to help you understand what other perspectives are coming on from your colleagues, from other areas, a different way of thinking that you may not have thought about. So again, I want you to reflect on this question, which principle, if practiced tomorrow, could most transform your community or how your community thrives based on those 5 principles. And maybe we can discuss that at the end of the conversation. And if you think about these design principles, how might we design for trust and communication across differences to create a true community that thrives in the future? And now let's move on to slide number 9. I've just got a couple more to go. And this is more of the closing. So how do we come into this space of claroscopic Ubuntu vision for a flourishing future? So I already explained what the kaleidoscopic vision is, and I call that an illusion. And the kaleidoscopic vision is really reality refracted, but it's just fragments of reality from different perspectives. So if you think, people that speak different languages or have different perspectives, different cultural backgrounds, that's all the sort of the kaleidoscopic perspective. But the clarity comes through when we're able to accept those fragments of the kaleidoscopic perspective as they are, and then to see the bigger picture, to actually be able to see that entire elephant. And that happens when we allow ourselves to co-create that picture together. So a bit like putting a puzzle pieces together. So the future will really not be designed by individuals alone. We're moving farther and farther away from this design principle of the kaleidoscope, where the design is already embedded, so you can't change what is there, and moving into something that allows for growth, allows for boundaries to be pushed. And that's sort of the kaleidoscopic vision. But again, without boundaries, things tend to fragment even further. So we need a clarified vision. So communities who dare to see clearly together then create that Ubuntu claroscopic vision. So when you're designing for trust and communication, and I know you've got a design challenge coming up next month, you will already be practicing this idea of claroscopic Ubuntu vision, seeing fragments together as a whole. And how you do that is really based on what is the community that is designing, what is emerging in the collective field, and then those pieces, how they come together to create this clarified vision of what it is that you want to design. And slide 10, please. So I want us to reflect a little bit, just a reflective exercise, what it means to see together, seeing together with claroscopic Ubuntu vision. If you are very comfortable, I like to do some kind of embodied exercises as well, just to break down all that talk. So if you're comfortable, I invite you to just close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you're holding a kaleidoscope. And inside, you're seeing these dazzling fragments and colors and patterns. Very beautiful, but they're also quite disconnected. And I want you to notice how it feels to be surrounded by those fragments. So I want you to have your eyes closed and imagine you're holding that kaleidoscope. And what is it that you're seeing? Images that are dazzling and colorful in front of your eyes. You're no longer seeing the reality around you. And from that kaleidoscopic perspective, I want you to then imagine it is a kaleidoscope, that those fragments, those dazzling images are no longer there. So there's clarity. And suddenly you see the real world refracted. So wherever you are right now, you might be looking at a forest or a river or a face. You might be hearing different voices and you're actually seeing them. And each fragment is real. It is a part of reality, carrying its own truth. And then notice how diversity begins to form patterns of meaning. When you have sort of suspended your kaleidoscopic, your limitation, right now you're seeing the whole. You can turn it whichever way you want, and it is your own perspective. And all of a sudden, that diversity begins to form those patterns of meaning. Now your world has a whole different meaning. And now open that lens a bit wider and imagine that you're no longer looking alone. You're actually looking through that kaleidoscope with others. And together you start to align the fragments until clarity emerges. So the scope is wider because everybody's looking through the same thing. And that to me is a claroscopic Ubuntu vision, which is to see reality as it is, and then to see it together as a whole. And with your eyes still closed, I want you to ask yourself, what clarity is emerging for me? What is the shape that is emerging? What needs to be designed? What is asking to be designed? Or what needs to change in order for there to be coherence? Is it trust within your community? Is it different voices that haven't been heard that need to be heard? What is the shape that's emerging? And from that perspective, then you can start to imagine what kind of future might we co-create with this new information that helps us complete this picture. And when you open your eyes slowly, I invite you to carry that clarity back into your work and into the design challenge ahead. So you're welcome to open your eyes and to move on to the next slide. Thank you. Questions, please.
Thank you so much, Wakanyi. I'm gonna start us with some questions. First, thank you again for sharing all this wisdom with us. I was wondering as I was listening to you, how might we reconcile honoring this multiplicity and this clariscopic Ubuntu vision you were talking about with the rapid digital transformation and this focus on efficiency that we are currently seeing in the AI industry and the workplace in general?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that the answer to any question you have, I will say it's relational. It's relational
Mhm.
clarity. How do we design for relationships to flourish? You know, we're really challenged right now with work, right? We don't know what the future of work looks like, but we know that there's going to be some form of working, whether we're working more from home or in the office or gathering in different forms. We don't yet know, right? And I'm sure that's a challenge for your company that you think a lot about. But I think the biggest and most important part of design, any design for workplace, is going to be how we design for relationships to flourish,
Mm.
because we can have a lot of our artificial intelligence, our AI assistants and all of that doing a lot of the back end work. But how do we design to ensure that people are not being left out? How do we design to ensure that voices that are usually silent can now come in, you know, and we're not going to be having these hierarchies anymore. So how do we design to ensure that there's no awkwardness in the gathering spaces, right? Because with Ubuntu Vision, it's a reminder that the workplace is also a living ecosystem. So where people's well-being and Earth's well-being are all coming in as one. So how do we design for that? And that's challenging, I can imagine. So it's a question of, you know, do we design for rooms where people can come in and go and have particular conversations? It is amplifying spaces for relational clarity, where that the relationships between people are clarified beyond diversity, beyond inclusion. What does it mean to relate now with all our differences? And I think that's going to be the challenge.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That reminded me actually of, yeah, working for this idea of like closeness and being all of us under the same umbrella. No? We have a question from one of our attendees. Maria mentioned, I'd like to ask, how do you see communities using AI to amplify community storytelling and preserve cultural heritage? Any key factors to consider?
You have to work with communities, and this is something I'm already doing. So there's
Mm.
a few organizations out there or AI companies that have emerged that are trying to preserve languages such as endangered indigenous languages and indigenous knowledge systems and early warning systems for environmental degradation, especially on indigenous land. And what what is emerging, what's really important is that these communities are, first of all, not interested in being part of that ecosystem, right? So building for trust. So trust building is very important. That's the number one step. And again, relationships. There has to be relational clarity, and how we communicate what it is that we're trying to build is important, because it's ultimately up to the community to adapt to or to decide, to choose to adapt to whatever the new technology is. And they might come up with something else. And ensuring that data is being ethically collected, which again goes back to how we relate with each other, how we gather stories, whose stories are we shaping and whose stories are not being shaped by AI, and how are we capturing these stories, because some stories are obviously sensitive. So designing with community requires, again, this Ubuntu methodology of relating, ensuring that you have a relationship, which takes time again, right? And so, yeah, I think that's the important thing.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, here at the Impact team, we're always wondering like, how do we work with community? What is our role as
Mhm.
like steel case within the community? So building a little bit on what you just said, what role do you see organizations, again, like Steelcase or any other industry, uh, playing in integrating or helping integrate Ubuntu and this, again, community and this feeling of closeness into tech or workplace innovation?
Yeah, well, I mean, Steelcase can become more than just a furniture company, which I think it is far more than that, right? It can be a weaver of this relational clarity. Because again, like I said, Ubuntu reminds us that even the workplace is in fact the living ecosystem. It's where we gather outside of our own communities. It's where we are taken out of our own communities of choice, right? So if you're looking at this, Steelcase is uniquely placed to model what it looks like to design workplaces that are not just for productivity. Think about
Mm.
it like this. So what could that design look like that enables for interdependence? This could be very interesting. I mean, I think architecturally, you could think of the workplace as a home away from home, right? But also how it embodies the living systems that we're a part of. Places where not just human beings are flourishing, but actually ecological flourishing is also present. We can see that movement. So to veer us away from further fragmentation and the illusion of separation, how do we create that space where there is interconnectedness, there is a flow, there is spaces where people can relate with each other in a more natural way, rather than that typical boardroom where you sit in a particular chair. It's not always comfortable. You're waiting to go get your cup of coffee and maybe just take off from this. How do we create a whole different space? And even how do we create the sitting space, the sitting arrangement, and that sort of thing? So I think Steelcase has that opportunity right now. Before we can decide what the future of work looks like, you can also start to imagine what that living space, living ecosystem would look like.
Yes, thank you. It's actually, I think, very relevant to like our latest like work at Steelcase, and we're now implementing this community-based design where we're actually working on, yeah, embodying this way communities are built and how they flourish into the
Yeah.
workspace and how, yeah, we can make this interconnectedness and flow of communication.
Yeah.
We have another question from the audience. Ilda mentions, I am curious. I saw something I can translate to slowing down, less is more in the Clariscopic Ubuntu exercise. Curious what to do with this now. What did other people see? So yeah, anybody else wants to like share, or even you, what can you want to
I would
share like a
love
little bit on
nothing
that?
more than to hear. I actually would love to hear from others, not to just hear my own voice. I want to hear
Mm.
what that exercise did for you. What did you begin to see? Because it takes you outside of just your own vision, that kaleidoscopic vision. This is what I'm going to design, and then I'm going to put it out there. What if you did the opposite, where you actually expanded that lens, that scope, and started to see with others? And when you start to see with others, you start to see very different things. So what did that feel like for anybody? Does anybody want to share?
I can start us off. For me, it was very much like a mindfulness meditation exercise where like I started, yeah, also thinking of like, okay, who are we living out of, like the activities we do at work, the programs we design, yeah, like just my day to day. And I think similar to Hilda, I was thinking more like, yeah, slowing down and just like stopping and thinking and reflecting how to move forward and trying to find ways to, yeah, just like incorporate and focus on like who we're living out. Uh, Someone also put in the chat, what is your recommendation on how to introduce these cultures that are pretty strange from the real community experience?
I think we could start with just that. When you gather as a community and you're trying to figure out a particular problem in your hands or something you're trying to design, start with what are we not seeing? Do that little exercise. Yes, it might sound like a mindfulness exercise, but actually, for me, it's more of an exercise of adjusting the lens through
Mm,
which we see the world, through which we see each other. So I want to move away from just talking about diversity as something nice to have and we can see each other, we see our differences. What do those differences teach us? What are we seeing together when we put those differences out there, like outside of ourselves, right? Where we agree that, with Ubuntu means being human. So we are human, right? That's a general assumption and agreement. But what is this being human mean when we start to expand that kaleidoscope into that clarified vision? And then from there you build it back, right? So you reverse engineer, you come back and you say, this is what I saw, and the next person, and that becomes sort of the puzzle piece. That is a much different way of designing, and it also goes back to that question of how to design with communities. It's exactly that. You need the community to show you what you're not seeing, and then you bring
yeah.
that vision back. And when everyone agrees that yes, we saw that, yes, that's what we heard, then it becomes a design principle within whatever it is that you want to innovate.
Yes, yes. And I think even just this simple question or this simple like uh, principle, no, we are human. I think it changes from like person to person and the way we live our humanity. It's different, not just within communities, but within individuals. So again,
Yeah,
expanding and bringing these visions back to our work, I think it's a great exercise.
yeah.
Um, we have another comment, not a question, but love the reflection prompts that Wakanyi had on one slide. Is it possible to share them in the chat? And very insightful presentation.
Yes, absolutely. You can have the slides later on. There's actually one last slide with recommendations of two different books that you feel free to read them. And then an organization that I think would be quite useful for you to see how you can implement some of their ways of creating coherence with whatever AI tools that you're using in your workplace.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much. Any other last questions, reflections from the audience? Okay, perfect. If not, I'm happy to move to our last slide, just like talking about some additional resources. Sorry about this. Hold on. Just like, yeah, as Wakanji mentioned, we're going to share some reflection exercises via email, the reflection prompts, and any other additional material. I also just wanted to take this opportunity to remind you on Friday, October 24th, we're going to have our Better is Possible Design Challenge. We're going to share more information and registration and participation next week. And then finally on December 4th, we're going to have a webinar with Susie Wise on design for belonging. Uh, yeah. And anything else, just keep an eye on your inbox for more information on both events. And thank you everyone for coming. We hope you had a great time with us and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, Wakanji, for joining us. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us.